Meanwhile, a very serious story now that we want to talk about. 2 U.S. Navy sailors are facing national security charges for allegedly sharing sensitive military information with the Chinese Communist Party in exchange for cash. The Justice Department says one of the sailors sent a Chinese intelligence officer pictures and videos of the ship he served on and naval ship manuals in a separate case. Another Navy service member based near Los Angeles allegedly provided a Chinese agent with plans for a major military exercise in the Indo-Pacific. Joining me right now is Heritage Foundation National Security and Foreign Policy Vice President James Carafano. James, great to see you. Thanks very much for being here this morning. This is a disturbing story. I know one of these people was born in China. He was becoming an American citizen. And as he was going through the process of becoming an American citizen, he was approached by a Chinese Communist Party member and took the ask and did it, allegedly. Your thoughts?
So one of two things could be going on here. Everybody spies on everybody. That's not a big deal. Most countries spy on the U.S. to really understand what big U.S. policy is or our economic policy or something like that. This is very nuts and bolts stuff. So one is, if the Chinese are really looking at the nuts and bolts capabilities of the U.S. military, that's assessing our military capabilities, which you would only do if you're looking at a military competition. That's super serious. The other thing, and this is quite common, it was quite common with the Soviets and the Russians, which is it's a gateway drug. You find people, you get them to provide stuff. Honestly, you could probably get other places, but what you want to do is set the hook. And that's for one of two reasons. Either you are hoping that they're going to be with you for a long time, and you can use them as they move up to get things in the future, or essentially they become captive of you and you can use them for other stuff. Either of these are very nuts and bolts kinds of activities. And the thing is they're usually very, very broad based. These are probably not the only two people the Chinese approach, but we've seen these things before. They do the same thing with American students that go to China. They hook them, they offer money for something, and it's either they're going to use them later on as they move up the food chain, or they're going to have assets that they can then use to do something else.
Yeah, no, I understand that this has been going on a long time and that the Chinese Communist Party has its own strategy to get people to give them information. I wrote an entire book about it called The Cost, and I, highlighted what was going on at several companies, including Motorola, where people were working for the CCP, sending patent information back, according to the CEO there. But what I'm talking about is the seriousness of this. I know it's been going on. We saw a whole string of indictments as a result of this under the Trump administration. But look at the pattern here. Officials found suspected Chinese malware hidden in various U.S. military systems last week. We had that story. Its intended use is disruption rather than surveillance, according to officials. It was a disturbing change in intent. The expert said you have the CCP trying to buy land near military installations. We had, for God's sakes, we had a surveillance balloon travel across the country and hover above military installations. So this is not the first time we've seen the CCP try to get military information, but these individuals apparently were giving specific information about U.S. plans in the Indo-Pacific. Does that suggest to you that the CCP is gearing up for conflict with the United States?
Well, they're certainly gearing up to understand the full scope of U.S. military capabilities and how to counter that. And whether that they're going to a specific end state or not, what is very clear is when you add that and all the other things you just mentioned and the other things we've talked about, this is a real war. This is a Cold War. I mean, we should just call it what it is. In fact, we wrote a major report at Heritage, and we just said this is a new Cold War, outlined 100 things we need to do. This is our enemy. And I'll tell you where this story ought to strike a raw nerve with people. Look at what Biden's policy is today. It's all this reaching out to China, talk to the Chinese. Much of it kind of fall flat, but all Biden is trying, his strategy literally is to kind of park the whole China situation until after the election. He just wants things to be quiet. This is exactly the wrong attitude for the U.S. and U.S. interests. We're sending the wrong message to the Chinese. We're sending the wrong message to the friends and allies. at a point in time when we literally should be looking the American people in the eye and say, let's be honest, we are in a new Cold War, and if we don't take China seriously, we're putting ourselves at peril. Our White House is saying the opposite, and we have news stories like this telling America, asking what the heck is going on in Washington.
Well, that is exactly right. The soft approach to China is just incredible, given the reality that we all are watching. The House Select Committee on China is doing a lot more than this White House. Chairman Mike Gallagher joined me this week on this program, calling on the president to widen this executive order that Biden has been sitting on. He's expected to release this executive order next week, which would limit U.S. investments in China to cover stocks and bonds. Gallagher wrote a letter to President Biden yesterday saying, quote, public market investments represent the majority of U.S. capital flows to the PRC. Any rules that exempt them will fail to address the bulk of the national security threat. I mean, James, let's face it, our capital markets are wide open to the CCP, and in effect, investors are funding the expansion of the CCP. That's why the Prime Minister of Italy told me last week that she's not sure she's actually going to renew this Belt and Road strategy that her predecessor put in place in Italy. Here's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni with me earlier this week. Watch. There are new questions now on whether or not you will renew this next year. Have you made a decision?
Not yet. It is something that has to be discussed in Italy with the parliament and with the actors. The paradox with the Belt and Road Initiative is that we are the only nation in the G7 and the European Union, but we are not the nation that has the best trade with China. That means you can have good relations with China without the Belt and Road Initiative.
She gets it, James. Is Italy on the right track here? And what should the U.S. be doing right now in the face of all of this aggression?
Yeah, we actually talked to the Italians a lot, and they're definitely moving in the direction of pulling out. And what's unusual is, almost everything in the world where things are going well, it's because our friends and allies are pulling us forward. The rest of Europe is standing there and saying, what is America going to do to counter China? And they're sitting back because we're not moving aggressively. The Italians made a measure in their own self-interest and say, we're getting nothing from being in the Belt and Road, and we're giving China this gimme for nothing. Why are we doing that? And so this is Meloni's leadership. She's the strongest, most principled conservative leader in the world today that in government. Meanwhile, and the uncovered story is, and you actually kind of alluded to this, is when the Biden administration started their, hey, let's just make nice with China and show we're the adults in the room, and this is all going okay, and we're managing this and just parking it till after the election, they've literally tried to put on hold every single executive action, every single executive initiative, every single law that's moving through Congress to show the Chinese, hey, let's just take a time out here. But again, it's people like Gallagher, Meloni, they're trying to build a momentum and get the world to understand that this is a real threat. And the administration is saying, oh, well, let's just, it's like if Truman in 1948, when the Korean War broke it out, said, let's just take a time out and talk about this.
Mm-hmm. Well, even,
actually, 1950 it broke out, but you know what I mean.
President Trump was probably among the toughest on the CCP when it comes to tariffs. And I asked him about this capital markets lever to pull, but he wouldn't commit to actually changing the capital markets, because it is, when you're talking from an investment standpoint, people say, well, we want that option to invest in China. But this is a bigger issue because it has to do with national security. Here's the way I phrased it with President Trump when he joined me 2 weeks ago. Watch this. Would you be prepared to attack the economic relationship that we have with China? For example, the capital markets are wide open for communist China, and unwitting investors are basically funding the expansion of the CCP. Would you put limits in place in terms of what Americans can buy?
So I did something better. I did tremendous tariffs. We took in hundreds of billions of dollars, tariffs and taxes. So when China, which was just dumping everything into our country, steel and everything. They were dumping steel at a level that was going to put our steel mills out of business, which is what they wanted. I saved the steel industry. We were dead. And I taxed a 50% tax on dumping steel. And then they start sending it through other countries, and we caught them. And they start sending it through Canada.
James, the Biden administration right now is considering lifting sanctions So while Trump is talking about tariffs and sanctions, the Biden administration, even as they talk about this executive order that they've been sitting on for months, apparently, they still are considering easing the situation for the CCP and lifting sanctions if the CCP agrees to new rules on fentanyl, which I'm not buying.
You know, what's incredibly frustrating about this is exactly the time to go after China. Their economy is struggling. They've got serious unemployment issues. They've got serious growth issues. The China brand is down globally. The fact that countries like Italy could stand up at China and say, walk away from the Belt and Road, now is the time to go after the Chinese. And Biden basically wants to take a timeout.
Yep. James, great to get your take on all of that. Thanks so much.